Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 20 minutes from the future. Today, we are very happy to have a very special guest. He's Finnish, but now is located in Dubai. And here we are with Markku Wilenius. Welcome, Markku.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, Markku, you are so many different things all together, and I will try to give a small introduction about yourself. Markku, in fact, is, I believe, everybody believes actually, one of the most important futurists in the world. He's an author, a speaker with more than 25 years of experience in future studies. In fact, his primary interest is in understanding the opportunities and challenges that could arise in the future and bringing this crucial foresight to the attention of society and organizations across the world. And he was a professor of future studies at the University of Turku. He's also the UNESCO Chair in Learning Society and Futures of Education. He has been a member of the prestigious Club of Rome for more than 12 years now, I believe. And he wrote an amazing book, several books actually, but the last one was for me very impressive and a subject which I'm still studying more or less every week, which I suggest everyone to do the same. The title is Patterns of the Future, Understanding the Next Wave of Global Change. And now he is in Dubai because he's Dean of the Future Dubai Academy. So Markku, wow, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
So the first question for you is, we are living in this very difficult situation nowadays. And are you optimistic about the next future? And how do you see we will react as a global community to this situation?
Yes. So first of all, thank you for invitation. And this question, of course, is something which is being asked at this point very often from me. My answer is something like this. I think this whole issue about the corona is really important for us because it carries a message. And this message is that we need to rethink how we are running our societies and businesses and our lives. It gives us a kind of a wake-up call to think about more socially, more long-term, and more strategically in terms of what might be the next thing. Because if the next thing is something different than what you have today, we need to be prepared for that. So all of these aspects are now heavily trained. The question is whether we take the learning or not. But if we think about, for instance, that this coronavirus has stopped some of the economies in our countries, and it has slashed down a lot of, let's say, emission levels that we have been talking all these years how to get them down. And then comes something over smaller than what we can see and puts us down and makes the emissions down, which makes it more towards, but not as yet, but more towards the sustainability levels. And my work in the last 25 years or 35 years with this future studies has been all about to understand what does it take to build a sustainable society. So we are now in the middle of this type of experiment, and as I said, that I hope we learn that. I'm optimistic that we do, because in a way, it would be a very sad thing if we would go back to the things as they were before the corona. So, and that's actually more unlikely to happen. So more likely is that we learn and we move forward with our understanding how we should run our societies and our lives.
What are the main steps we should take in order to go towards that future you are hoping we will get to?
Well, I think there are kind of a couple of really important steps. The first one I said is like saying that this should increase our curiosity about alternative futures. A lot of things that we tend to do in the societies and in the businesses and in our own lives sort of are derived from the past. So we are just continuing what has been done in the past, and we maybe adding something there, but essentially we're doing the same. Now, the curiosity means that we are curious about the future. So we are actually curious about hearing what type of the calls, as I call them, what type of the calls and invitations there are from the future. And when we take those calls and invitations seriously, then we see that that we need to make this kind of a comparison with this call vis-a-vis the past, the way we have done things in the past. And we know that in this type of the crisis, we have much more kind of much more sturdy opportunities to make these shifts that we see actually necessary. Probably we have been pondering about them for a long time, but we have not had the courage or the curiosity to go and change our ways. Now this curiosity helps that to happen. The second thing is that we need to stop to think that there is only one way into the future, that we need to be able to look at the alternatives, the options, the scenarios. Scenario thinking is the very basis of the futures thinking. What is the scenario thinking for? It is for any type of complex problem solution. And nobody can deny that in this world, we are living in a much more complex world than it used to be like 20, 30, 50, or even 5 years ago. The complexity of the world is growing. So, which means that we cannot anymore look at the future as if it would be a simple system, and we would be able to understand the relations, how the impacts of different events happen. We can project them, but to predict them is a foolish thing. We cannot do that. Instead, we need to open up this and see what are the different alternatives. And when we have done that in a thorough way, then from there we take the learning and we set our path towards one of these futures, but being agile also for alternative options. So this is how we should be working. Then perhaps the third thing would be like taking the society back to the people. If you look at, for instance, the urban development, which is striking, we have been the most of the urbanization happened in the last 30 years. Now the more of the people globally live in urban conditions rather than rural. So there has been a huge shift, and yet the way that we are designing our cities is still pretty much from the industrial times. We think about the commerce, we think about the cars, and then the people come in the last. So if you think about the typical pathway, you think about the typical lane or a road in the city, and think how much there is a place for the people to walk or bike vis-a-vis how much there is a place for cars or trucks, or you start to see that how little we actually understand and appreciate the human being there. And this comes in the same way in any type of the businesses we are running. How do you measure the value of the people of, let's say, any type of the business? You can't say that because we have not been able to develop a measure, nor that we have had any interest in that. So we're measuring the typical assets and the capital, which is the financial capital, the physical capitals, and so forth. So all this means that we can see this very systematically throughout our society, that people have been pushed aside, and the result is very obvious. We have not been designed these our lives, whether in the cities or outside in the city, very much on the human terms. The other things have been kind of a more or kind of a priming and waiting in the any kind of a development, and this is now time to take that back, because if the ultimate problem that we have is that we are the conflict with nature. I mean, this corona is just one implication of that we have this conflict, and the conflict is that we don't understand how the nature works, and we don't take that into account. We don't take the nature as a partner, and we're just extracting the stuff that we want, but we leave it like that, and we don't think about the consequences, which is one implication that we are not thinking about the future's way. The future's way means that you are always thinking about and you care about the consequences of any type of action you do. In the economy, we still are wasting material in the huge sense. You know, the resource productivity of our economic systems are terrible today. And that's why we have been indebted almost in any country except Switzerland and Norway. We are so much indebted, and this is certainly true with Italy. So, and this is because we are not thinking in the way that we should be thinking in this century, which is looking at the more holistically, more from the point of view of resource productivity, and building intelligent ways of running our businesses, our lives, and our nations.
Which is also the theory you explain in your book about the waves of development. Yes. That nowadays we are in the 6th wave, and probably what is happening with coronavirus is a boost for this better use of a more intelligent use of resources, and a more sustainable way. And maybe we will need to shift from a GDP count to something else, which will take into account different aspects as you described. And which, under a geopolitical point of view, which area do you think could lead this revolution, or let's say this wave, if any?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and very hard to answer. Let's start from the one premise, and this is that unlike in the last century, unlike in the 2 centuries ago, so in the 19th century, we're going to have a very different type of geopolitics in this century, and it's based not on 1 or 2 nations leading, but it's a much more widespread and disintegrated system of nations and regions and cities. So it is much more complex, much more decentralized. Where does the new come from? I think the history proves that there are 2 sort of conditions there. The one is that they usually come from a little bit unexpected marginals. They certainly not come from the core or the dominant players in the previous system. They cannot renew themselves fast enough. So it has to come from the fringes. And second thing is that it has to be there where the ambitions are high. And how do we feed ambitions? We feed our ambitions in 2 ways. We either do it because we are creating collectively something, really collectively something to the distance up there into the future that we all kind of inspire with. And the second thing is that we are enabled to make that happen, which means that there is a certain sense of empowerment for the people to actually to go and do it once this sort of a vision has been created. So I'm here now in Dubai, which has done amazing things in the past. But this region that Dubai is a part of, the Gulf region, is a region which has been troubled by much of the um, 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 history that has actually taken a lot of possibilities out of the system, so to say. At the same time, when you look at the map says that, particularly if it's a two-dimensional map, so it's not really looking at the ball, but it's like you see that this region and Dubai and the Arab Emirates is interesting in the middle. So which means that in our globalized world, this is quite easy to reach physically, but also it means that the streams of people, and that's the streams of skills and competencies, could easily come here as a global kind of a hub. And that makes me to think that this might be one of these places where the future will be created. But of course, there is a lot of past here also. If you think about the oil industry and all that, that has made this kind of a being rather comfortable with the past because it has generated a lot of funds. Now, but you need that ambition, and ambition needs to be something that not just continue the way that we have been doing. Let's do something new. And as I said here, particularly here in Dubai, the tendency has been that they have done it many ways to almost to make impossible deeds and big steps into the future. Of course, we have some other places around the earth which are also interesting hotspots in this sense. I'm a bit tempted to take my own region and the country, Nordic, Nordic countries and Finland, because there, if Dubai has been kind of a technologically and commercially leaping really fast, you would say that in Finland, in Nordic countries, there has been a great emphasis on well-being and equality and equal opportunities and learning and all that. So the best model currently is to be found from there. It doesn't say that it represents the future, but it represents the best that we have done this far. And it is a promise for the future as well. Then we have some other parts of, we have interesting countries all around the world that have done some remarkable things like Vietnam or Costa Rica. We have, so what I'm saying is that I think that the future will come from many sources, and most of these sources are situated in rather small countries. If you look at the history, the domination in the world has been played by big countries like UK and US and Russia, Soviet Union, those kind of. And there was a time when it was a very resource intensive, the whole development. Now the most important asset for the future is the capacity of the people, and I strongly feel that way. But the capacity meaning not only the individual capacity, but the collective capacities and how you are building on that. I think that's the name of the game for the future. And I believe strongly that those that can be doing that best comes from these rather small regions / countries that kind of can unite their forces and be able to kind of align themselves to a certain future and then start to build the pathways towards that. And I like to see this as a global map where we can see different things in different places. There is no one solution, nothing to fit for all, but these new buds of something interesting going on, I believe they come from from, as I said, from a different part of the world.
Oh, I will listen to you for hours. It's so interesting. But what you said also put some sadness on me, because the qualities you are looking and you are spotting in a country in order to, to lead this revolution in this wave rather than revolution. I don't see them in Italy, especially when you talk about working collectively, because we are not used to it. I used to say that when we were at school, nobody taught us how to play or to do some, work together with. And now it's different, but still we are not used to do it.
Yeah.
In this, how do you see Italy in this scenario where things has to change, and that we have structural issues as regards we don't politicians able to look ahead, in 10, 20, 40 years time, because everybody is looking an issue for Italy, but for a lot of politicians all around the world, they're not able to look ahead of time, but just to, yes, maybe the next 3 to 6 months election time. So do you have any hope for our country, or do you, or not? Frankly,
okay. Okay, let's start with looking at some strengths and then some weaknesses, and then we take from there. So the strengths in Italy, there is a very strong culture for designing things, whether it's about designing beautiful bags or shoes, whether it's about designing piazzas or buildings. You see that everywhere, and that's a beautiful asset. Very rare, because not all cultures are carrying this type of eye for forms and the designs. And when we are thinking about designing the future, this type of asset might be very valuable. The second thing, what I find is that, well, if you think about just about Italian cuisine, I always think that it's the cuisine that respect the ingredients. It respects what comes out of the soil and the country, and whether it's about food or wine or whatever, it's so there has been developed this kind of a cultural understanding the power of nature and natural things as they are, and taking appreciation from there. And then the third aspect is that, of course, Italy is a very, it's built on Roman culture, and it has it has developed its language. Its language is beautiful, also a part of this design, I would say, but also that it has cultivated a lot of forms. Some of these forms of behaviors are still very much valid. Some of them are outdated and some of them not valid. But I think there is still a touch in the Italian culture, which is even if you see that the current way of how people are dealing is indeed individualistic, I think that there is a very strong collective undertone there. But it's been kind of disintegrated in the modern times for the reasons that are much more kind of a mundane in terms of economic interest. I would say that the self-interest has played over the collective interest. And of course, then we actually slipping now into the weaknesses, which is shown in the politics. So what is always striking for me, if I come to Italy or talk to Italian people and we start to talk about the politics, I don't know almost any other country apart from some South American countries, then people just say right from the beginning that the politics are crazy here, and it always comes in one way or another. And politics should not be crazy. It's not about, system that is in a chaos and where people are sharing the benefits to each other rather than taking care of the whole. I think there must be a lot of sincere insight and understanding and action in the politics of Italy, but somehow it always seems to be subdued to this kind of a more parochial interest, and the common good is left out, and of course that's a very sad thing. That's part of the problem why the economy is lagging, and why also the politics seems to be, well, crazy. But I'm not dictating that this should be so in the future. Nobody would would think that in a country like here in Dubai, I just take one example. Dubai is a part of the United Arab Emirates. According to Edelman Trust Barometer, which is a very reliable estimate of how people trust to their governments in different parts of the world, this is, I think, the second or third most trusted country in terms of how much people are trusting what their governments are doing. Here, United Arab Emirates, and very few people know that. I see, and also you're astonished, but this is the case. Why is that? They have been building very rigorously this type of approach, that all the procedures when it comes to the governance and government needs to be strictly transparent, open, made always on the equal basis, and no favors anywhere, just being very, very transparent system. And everybody follows the same rules and norms, no exceptions. And which reminds me very much what actually, Finland, I'm not trying to say it's always like that, but it's a little bit like that, let's say. And also people there trust generally a lot to them.
Who is in the first position?
Yeah. So I have some experience, and it is interesting. And particularly this teaching from here says that it's possible. You can make it. You can make it anywhere in the world. Whatever constitution and the system you have in place, you can always make it better. So that's something that what I want to tell, that it is like, if we are getting into the something, we are getting the consequences that we don't want, and then we need to look back. What are the causes? What are the root causes? And if we look at the Italy, and somebody would say, "Oh my God, it's a hopeless situation." So much political disarray, and disintegration and corruption and what not. But when you look at that, okay, what are our strengths? As I told you before, the strengths are in the design, into the collective, and into taking things as they are. And if you could use those strengths, you can build up another type of Italy. You could make of Italy of the future that would actually respect the strengths that they have. And that would be a beautifully designed government and governance system, and the politics that really works for the good for the people. Just using the cultural strengths that you have. So as long as there is a life, there is a hope also for Italy, I would say. And it's I always remember when the slow food movement started in Italy, and And it was a nice movement because it said no to the past and yes to the future. Because it's just read how things are moving, that people are more appreciating slow food and fast food. Not everybody is on the fast food track. They want to have a slow food. Okay, we have here a nice food and we can serve it to the people. They love their taste. Let's conceptualize it. Let's make it something bigger. Let's build a community around here. Let's support us as farmers and producers. And we know what was the result. The value of the land rise, the prices rise. People were more, be able to living on that. The business was flourishing and all that. And it is just this one decision to work together and understand where are the needs, how the world is moving. And I think this type of exercises we need to do a lot more in Italy as elsewhere, really to understand where we can create something of the value. We can offer something that the others perhaps cannot, because we have something special to give, and let's just lift it and offer it to the people.
Markku, a personal question. Why did you start to study futures, scenarios, and future studies?
Well, I guess I have been always a bit interested in that, but the real striking kind of a game changer came me in the form of the one human being that I met. I was a very young researcher at that time, and I went to visit one professor there in Turku. I was living in Helsinki. I went to visit one professor in Turku and I wanted to ask about the future. I was in part of the program that this was early 90s, the first program that was kind of estimating the impacts of climate warming. And I went to him and asked him, he was a professor in the business school, and I wanted to ask him, how do you see that societies are changing into the future, taking into account that this climate change are to become? And I made actually later my PhD on climate change as well. So, and this guy looked at me and then we started to talk. And I was flabbergasted. I was so impressed what he said, because he said something that showed me that there is a possibility to think about how societies may look like in the future. And I have never heard anybody telling that in a consistent way, in a systematic way, looking the developments as they have coming up to this point from the distant past, and from there understanding what are the change factors and how we can actually assess different developments into the future. So that was the very moment when I decided that this is my stuff. I want to work on this.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And we have a next question for you, and thanks again for your time. A question came from somebody following us, and thinking we are now in the year 2050. Just describe us one thing which, in your opinion, will be completely different from now. A vivid image.
Okay.
One or two.
Well, one of the things that will be completely different is our economy. So our economy will be absolutely different. We will be circulating materials, reusing them, recycling them. There will be hardly no wastage around, because everything is used until it comes to the end of its life cycle. And a lot of that we are using a lot of intelligent technology for that, which means that actually we're going to build a taxation system which is totally different to what we have now. We are not going to be taxing labor anymore. We are taxing of using natural resources. So that pushes that into the right direction. And that means that we will have a totally new possibilities how we can employ ourselves. So the treasure for the labor, human labor, will be much lower. And that means that a lot of these services that we need actually to make a real well-being society would be possible to build. And so that would mean not only that the materials and our kind of a material structure of the economy would be much different, but it also would mean that we would be doing much more meaningful things, we human beings, inside that economy that needs to be a part of the revolution. And I think it will go pretty fast once we realize that. The second thing I would say is a total transformation of the agriculture. And why I say so? I say so because you will see as we move further on this decade that the agriculture is a real solution to climate change. Why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because we have been using now industrial measures how to cultivate our lands since the last 100, a little bit more than 100 years. As a result, 50 to 70% of the carbon from the soil that we are cultivating has set off to the atmosphere, which means that our soil is very poor, and the microbes and the enzymes that make up a healthy soil is mostly gone. This is scientific fact, which is being studied by many World Food Organizations, different research. And we have something like 30 to 60 harvest left before our topsoil in a lot of the agricultural land is completely vanished. So we start to realize this now, although there are lots of vested interest why we are not moving faster. But once we start to understand that 50% of the European Union budget goes to agriculture currently, and we could use that, only that vehicle, to build up a policies which makes the cultivation of the land more sustainable, and there are simple technologies and measures how you can do that, which would tie in the carbon into the land. Just think this, 25% of the currently cultivated agricultural land in the world, if that would be converted to this regenerative agriculture style, that would take as much as 250 gigatons of carbon to the soil. And now, to understand what that is, it is that our annual emissions are something like 50 gigatons. So we would be able to take the amount of the concentration of the carbon in the atmosphere almost down to the pre-industrial levels by using that measure. This is something which is available, and but we are not doing that, in spite of the fact that if you look at, for instance, if you look at the Italy, but particularly if you look at US, who are the ones that are doing most suicide? I mean, now I talk about particular pre-corona stuff because this built a lot of other hardship. But for that time, it was the farmers. The farmers in the world, in different parts of the world, are desperate because the way the whole farming industry is being structured is so bad. It's so kind of misaligned to what agriculture should be really doing. So, and I could continue this list of how things are different in 2050, but maybe these two examples are the ones that I would like to take first, but there are some others as well.
I'm sure about that. Markku, thank you so much. It was so inspiring. Like every time I had the chance to talk to you. So thank you very much
Thank you.
For our followers. If you weren't able to follow all the interview and the discussion we had with Markku, you will have it on YouTube later on today. Markku, again, thank you so much. It was a amazing, journey in the future, in the past, in your life somehow, and so thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and every best, and for your futures, whoever is listening to this. Italy is a wonderful country.
Thank you. Bye bye. See you next Tuesday for our
See you. Yes, let's do that. Yeah. Bye bye.
Grazie Markku.
Grazie mille.